notes and you're working on your assignments, and as the monitor has already said, you have to submit your assignments on 8th. What's for reason? You cannot say, I had a job or I had something else, therefore please extend it. It's already given long time back, so you need to submit it. There's no extension for the assignments. So, because the moment extension goes, it goes somewhere, and then when final marks come, people keep mailing, I submitted my assignment, I didn't get it, so that I don't want that to happen now. So submit on 8th. Show the existence of God. Now, one thing should be very clear. Whenever we try to prove or logically argue about the existence of God, the inferences that we are using are quite limited. And therefore, we should also be aware of the lack of arguments which completely tries to prove the existence of God. It has its own limitations. So we have to keep that in mind. That's the first thing that we have to keep in mind when we study about these arguments. Because we are using human inferences. Or in other words, we are using limited to explain the unlimited. We are using the comprehend one to explain the incomprehensive one. So that's the main thing that we have to understand as we delve into the whole argument process. Now, when we talk about the argument of this thing, first of all, one of the important things that we have to know is some of the Christians who have turned against the whole argument of whether God exists or not. So this is, when we talk about apologetics, we are trying to move into these people to understand whether God is in apologetic sense. Now, according to one of the well-known author, Richard Dawkins, who is the author of God of Delusion, the God delusion. You understand by the whole phrase, God delusion, what does it mean? It says, we are all atheists about most of the gods that humanity has ever believed in. Some of us just go one God further. In other words, what he is trying to conclude here is, he says, one or the other way, none of the human beings can explain the existence of God. Okay? They are limited in their existence. So something that cannot be explained is out of rational understanding. And therefore, he says, people go on believing as the age go on. So these are all delusions that the word he uses, okay, in us understanding that there is no God. Now, going further, when we come to another good person, which is there a God? Okay, Christopher Hitchens, who is another person, who is the author of God is Not Great, he says, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. These are the questions. So, according to Christopher Hitchens, he says, when you can't give an answer to these questions, therefore the whole argument of discussing whether God exists has to be dismissed. Now, what is Bible talking about in this relation to the whole concept? Is this something new? The atheistic worldview? Is that something new? Actually, what does the Bible gives an answer? Now, what we read from Romans chapter 1, verse 18 onwards, it says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of people who suppress the truth by their unrighteousness. Now this is very important. What Bible says is truth is evident. Okay, that's a very important thing. Truth is evident. But what people try to do is they don't want to accept those truths, but rather want to suppress those truths. The moment you accept that truth, you also has to align according to that truth. And therefore it is better not to align with, not to accept the truth, and then you become as though you are a free walker. That's what biblical understands. So when we talk about this discussion, we have to understand the notion of what the Bible has to say. And verse 19 it says, because what can be everything is plain. So this evening, as we continue in this class, we are going to show which is plain. Okay, the argument space is, it is very clear, evident in the naked eyes. Because God has made it plain to them. God has made, this has been Bible. Verse 120. For since the creation, so this is not an argument that God exists, why should we believe God? Show what is the origin of God. These are not something 21st century questions. Okay, or a question that has come in the meta-narrative world. It all started from the creation of the world. Okay, because people were questioning. So what God spoke before preachers started to preach, or before any books were written on it, or any testaments were written on it, or any scrolls were written on it. Creation of the world, the creation proves. That's a very important. So we start our argument with cosmos, world. You got it? So first, any attempt in an apologetic context dialogue to show the evidence of God, what is required is you have to show it through a cosmological argument. That's what Bible talks about. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes. Now what is his invisible attributes? Power and divine nature. What has been. Now any human being who, while understand the nature of that power, then according to Bible, the our textbook, it says they purposefully suppress the truth which is quite evident by the designer who designed the whole cosmos. You got it? It is just like an artist painting and then invisibly writes his name. Many times we say wow to the art, but never look who drew it. We just go into a museum and say, wow, that's wonderful art. But down somewhere, or in that art somewhere, the artists have mentioned the name. In the same manner, in all the display of the cosmos, in all that we see around us, God has his signature in this cosmos. And we, as we begin this evening, we are going to see some of the argument that is normally used, cosmological way. Then God says, so people are without excuse. People are without excuse. So now, when God says people are without excuse in the scripture, in the Bible, it means no argument that I never knew you stands at all in the judgment seat, before the judgment seat of God. No human being can go and stand before the judgment seat and say, I never knew about this. It's absolutely dismissed. It's not valid. Why? What 21? For although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or give him thanks. But they became futile in their thought. That's what. See, in apologetics, we should never become, our apologetics should not lead to futility. To be very clear. Okay? Our learning, our knowledge should not drive us away from the Creator. What happens in the theological institution is the whole theological training jeopardizes the whole notion of God. That's what is happening around the world today. Okay, especially in the critical studies. So, because they became futile in their thought, and the senseless heart were darkened, although they claimed to be wise, they became fool. Now, people like Richard Dawkins, people like Christopher, these people all claim to be wise. When they prove, when they write something as delusion God. But according to Bible, it says they became fools. So why I quoted this in detail is because any argument in the Bible says the signature of God is in nature. Once to the Napoleon Bonaparte, who was while on one of his ships at night, along with him some of the sailors were mocking the idea of God. And as the Napoleon, he pointed to the stars and said, "Gentlemen, before you dismiss the whole argument of God, you must get rid of those first." You hope you understood what he meant. Okay? By looking at these stars far away in the galaxy, dismissed those before you dismiss the whole argument of God. Okay? Now, for God, when we are trying to prove the evidence of God, what we read from the scripture shows the following conclusions. When we will try to reject God, it's from but as per Palin, it is a moral problem. What do you mean by that? Because any argument or any discussion about God has to also involve hamartiology, the whole origin of sin. That is what it means. Because when Bible opens up, Bible never wastes time or pages to explain the origin of God. It never wasted time. It just began. In the beginning, God created heavens and the earth. It never wrote an introduction and said, "Okay, now we are going to show the origin of God." Never it said that. So, first thing, very important is when we try to reject, someone tries to reject the whole argument of God, then most important thing is it has to do with moral problem. So moral problem cannot be solved by intellectual arguments. What is moral problem? As I said, human beings want to be free. They want to be not accountable to God. So what all arguments you are trying to prove, it doesn't make any sense to them. So this is what it is. But if it is a moral problem, why we want to argue first of all or show evidence? Why we want to show evidence? Look at the last point. God gave Moses a sign to prove to Israel that God has sent him, and to prove Pharaoh that God of Israel was one true God. Thomas needed evidence. Did you get this point? Even those who believe God, to confirm and move further, requires evidence. I don't think so. Anyone in the classroom is just serving God, just based on faith alone. You have different evidences in life which is called experiential evidence. which confirms what you believe. That's why we are moving into the cosmological argument. Okay. Now, what is the cosmological argument? Now, in your notes, I have explained that there are two important things whenever you start an argument. Okay? Whenever you start an argument, two things are very important. One is called premises. One is called premises. The second very important thing is it should be logical in sense when we talk about these arguments. Okay? Now, what is premises? Premises are different statements. The statements. And each of the statement is built upon the other statement, leading to a conclusion. Is that clear? Okay, premises means the statement, different statements which will derive to a conclusion. And this conclusion has to be logically valid. These conclusions has to be logically valid. When it is logically valid, then the statements or the premises becomes truth. It becomes truth. Okay? So that is very, very important for us to understand. Now, in the slide shown just now, we are using that premises or statements to derive a logical conclusion. Now, what is the cosmological argument? We know the term what does cosmos means. Is nothing but world. Okay? Logos means the word or the dialogue or the description that we are using to explain the existence of God. Now, the basic cosmological argument is that everything that exists has a cause. Okay? Everything that exists has a cause. Therefore, we know universe is existing. We know universe is existing. So therefore, if universe is existing, then it has a cause. It has a beginning. It has what we call as the first cause. It's not cause, but first cause. There is a reason why we are saying that. I'll explain that. A first cause. Now listen to me very carefully, because we are trying to develop the premises now here. Why did I say first cause? Then we'll come to all these premises of the cosmological argument. Now imagine, when we are saying there is a cause, what are we pointing at? We are pointing at that theory, that understanding, which says there is no cause, but universe is out of nothing. You got it? Universe is out of nothing. Then we should ask the question, why there is something rather than nothing? Why there is something rather than nothing? I'll explain what I mean by that. Example. Suppose we are all in the classroom, sitting and listening to the lectures, writing down notes, and we have a good environment. We are using different types of chair. So the question is, when you see this chair that you are seated upon, just raise the question, will you not ask, where did this chair origin from? Or to make it very logical, who designed the chair? Suppose you're using a steel or you're using a wooden chair, you'd say, where did it come from? Who made it into pieces? Who took it to the mill? Who turned the raw material into what you find comfort today? And how did that thing grew? It had a seed. It required a water. It required air. It required dirt. So the whole argument is the one that we are seated upon. If you see, there is a series of events behind that. When there is a series of events behind that, just now I explained, it means the product that you are seated upon is contingent. Contingent means, we use the word contingent. You have in your notes also. Contingent means dependent. Okay? So it is dependent on series of events that has taken place before. And because this has series of events, okay, you cannot say this series of events just is continuing. It just goes on. It cannot happen. There should be a first cause for these dependents. There should be a first cause. Did you get this point? And therefore, that's the argument we are developing. If the universe began to exist then, the universe has a cause. Just like I explained the example of a chair. Now we know that the universe began to exist. It is scientific science has proved, said that. And therefore, universe has a cause. Now if you go back to all these causes that you find, okay, you cannot say that universe was caused by chance. It was caused by chance. Why? The moment you say it was caused by chance, the problem is chance cannot cause something. Why? Because chance is not a being. If it is a being, not a being, then it is a probability which we use in mathematics sums to solve. It's a probability. Now, when you look at the whole argument of what chance can create, okay, it becomes very clear that even you cannot call it probability, it is impossible. It is impossible. Now you are all seated in your home. Suddenly you hear a bang outside, a big bang theory. Bang! Will you sit there or will you switch off the video, sneak out for a while, for a minute, and see what that sound is all about? Not even waiting for a permission to switch off the video. You will be so much curious just to sneak out and see what the sound is all about. Why can't the human being say that bang came out of chance, out of nothing? No, you will not argue. If you saw something, if you heard something, it is not a probability that it just came out, something. There should be a cause. There should be a cause. Now, what does a Big Bang presupposes? What is universe? Matter, energy. Okay? That, what does Big Bang say? This matter, the energy, all these things happen by itself. So the question we have to ask is, where did this come from? Who caused this to happen? Yes or no? You can't just say just matter or energy with normal examples that you see around us. Now, so we are now dealing with something called matter and energy. So those people who have a science background would get me what I'm trying to explain now a little further. Now listen very carefully. Some people, when they say that universe is eternal, they say no. Matter energy you're talking about, it was eternal. It is there from the beginning. Yes, it is not by chance. It is there from the beginning. It is no beginning. It is eternal. People like Sagan, very famous quote, he says, the universe is all there is and was and ever will be. But again, the premises of the logical problem with this view of universe is eternal is, we are now looking into the logical arguments. Okay, let's see the cosmological. What is the logical argument? The logical argument is, scientists have
recording in progress.
Scientists have discovered that universe is expanding. Okay, universe is expanding. Now, if universe is expanding according to the scientific view, you go back far enough, somewhere the expansion has to start in the past. Okay? And therefore, a scientist, Kalam argues, this is the argument. Now, if the universe had to begin to exist in finite time, which is eternal, you cannot get now, if you start from infinity, because now never arrives. If you have a finite beginning, you can only arrive at the present. Okay? You cannot just say, just began and therefore we are here. No. If it is infinity, it cannot happen. We are going to now, we will move into the whole notion of thermodynamics to explain this. Okay? So that is illogical. Going further, we will see the first law of thermodynamics. What does it say? We all know the first law of thermodynamics is conversion of energy. Okay? The whole notion of conversion of energy. Now, if you want to say what is the first law of thermodynamics states, we have all studied in our classrooms. Now, thermo or thermos, we all know, is energy. Okay? Thermos. Dynamics is a force. So, what is thermodynamics is the whole notion of energy. So, because they are saying universe energy was there. So, let's now evaluate that based on the whole notion of thermodynamics. Now, the first law of thermodynamics, it states, which is energy cannot be created. That's the first law, right? Nor destroyed. Energy can be neither created nor destroyed, but can only be converted from one form to the another form. Okay? Listen, this is very important. Now, we say it's expanding. So, first law of thermodynamics is you cannot create, you cannot destroy energy. Example. Now, if you want to illustrate that principle, just imagine wood is burning. When wood is burning, it is transformed into a different state. Yes, wood is burning, it is transformed into a different state. The original amount of energy present before the burning is still present. That's what first law of thermodynamics is. Okay? the energy, the original amount of energy that was present before the burning is still present. However, what is happening there is much of that energy was transformed into a different state, namely heat. So therefore, no energy has disappeared from the universe. Yes? Neither energy was brought into universe through burning the fuel or wood. No new energy was brought in. So therefore, the first law of thermodynamics is very important, that you cannot create energy, nor you can destroy energy. Okay? Now that is the first law of thermodynamics. I will come to the second law. Okay? So therefore, this is what is the whole concept. The law in essence states that energy and matter cannot be created or destroyed in a closed natural system. That is very important. Okay, that is very, very important. Closed natural. That means it within the universe, within the closed universe, it just created. So you cannot do that. You cannot create. Okay. So what is the conclusion? So the existence of matter energy must have come about by a supernatural event, a force outside of the system. Okay, there is a force outside the system that would have created the energy. Therefore, we have to also see the second law of thermodynamics, understand it completely. Meaning that second law of thermodynamics is saying that the energy is becoming less usable. Okay, less usable, which is called the law of entropy. This is also a scientific fact. Now, you will be thinking we came to study apologetics. We never thought we have to study this, right? But you need to, because this is the most modern word we have. Now, I'll explain each of these words. I will explain so that we will understand what does this terms means. Now, what is the second law of thermodynamics say? Second law of thermodynamics, in the first one we say there is a constant amount of energy in a given system. Okay, that's what first law. There is a constant amount of energy in a given system. What is happening? It is merely transforming it into a different state. Now, when it transforms into a different state, what happens? These energy become less usable. I have explained that. Now let's take the same illustration of that wood that I explained just now, of the burning wood. Okay? When the wood is burned, I said, it only changes into a different state. No energy is created, no energy is lost. Keep that in mind. That's what we said. Now, when it is transformed into a different energy, you know what happens about that energy? That is second law of thermodynamics. When it is created into a different state, that energy, what is that energy? When it is created in a different state, ash. Wood burned into ash. That ash becomes less retrievable and less accessible. You got the point? Ash becomes, you cannot retrieve it, nor it becomes accessible. So what is happening is that energy is unusable. This process is what is irreversible. You burned it, it became into ashes, you can't reverse it. So what is the implication of what we are talking? What is the implication? According to science, the universe is running out of usable energy. It is running out of usable energy, meaning it is being annihilated, it is being wasted. So what this unusable energy is what is called entropy. This is called entropy. You got it? Now, so what is science doing today? Science today is trying, for example, science today is trying to conserve this. Because what they are saying is, from an order, listen, from this energy is going to a chaos state, to a disordered state. Okay? Best example is all of you are sitting under AC. The best example is that the heat which is being converted, heat is being taken and converted back to the cooling system, to cooling through the mechanics process. Suppose you are you paint your house, okay? You look, it's fresh, wonderful, but what happens over time? You understand? What happens over time? You clean your house. What is happening? Dust around, decays. What is this all about? It's all about energy. So the whole process is entropy. It is order to decay. Order to decay. So if you want to say, what is the second law of thermodynamics? The second law of thermodynamics is, the universe is constantly getting more disorderly. Okay? And if this disorderness continues, what will happen? It will collapse, it will break down, it will wear out by itself. And therefore, we need to conserve this. You know, this is not, I created something, this is already a big discussion in the scientific field. So the fact is, what we call entropy is actually a fact of the universe. Now the world around us is trying to minimize. The world around us is trying to minimize the whole decayness, the whole process. Okay? Now, using this understanding of first principle of thermodynamics and the second principle of thermodynamics, you know what? We have some implications. What is the implication? What is the implication? Why are we learning this thermodynamics? To prove God exists. How? This is the implication. If there is no God, we have to explain the existence of universe without Him. As we saw, the Big Bang theory claim. What is the Big Bang theory taking? All matter in the universe, okay, all the matter in the universe was initially condensed in a sphere the size of a period. You got it? It was condensed in a sphere the size of a period in a sentence. Now you write a sentence, you put a period, a full stop. So what is the whole understanding they're saying? It says that the whole Big Bang theory is all the matter, all that you find, it was just narrowed down. See, closed. It was all narrowed down to a full stop, to a period, to a full stop. Now, if this is what they say, then this theory is not offering the explanation of the origin of sphere. You got it? They are saying it was condensed. So what is the origin of the sphere? The only logical possibility for the existence is that it popped into existence out of nothing. It popped into three things can happen. Either it popped into existence. 2, generated. 2, eternal. 3, it is created. Now let us evaluate based on the principle or the scientific law of thermodynamics, first and second law. It has different laws, but we'll use 2 laws. Let's evaluate these 3 possibilities. Whether it is spontaneously generated, whether it was eternal, or whether it was created. Now we are proving cosmological argument. Now if it says that the entire universe as a system which consists of mass, matter, energy, which exists in the universe, is all without God. It is all without God. They say it is without God. Then remember one thing. If it is without God, it all existed, then the whole system should be closed. The whole system should be closed. You got it? But the problem is, since our system that we live, it encompasses of the entire universe. Okay? There is no more mass that can cross the system boundary. It cannot cross the system boundary, which necessitates our system being closed without the existence of God. Is that clear? Okay. Now, if you say the whole system is closed, then our system is of the entire universe. So there is no more mass that can cross the system boundaries that they say, which will necessitate our system being closed. It can only be done with the existence of God. Now suppose if mass, matter and energy could enter and exist the system, if mass, matter and energy could enter and exist the system, then the system would be not closed system, it would be open system. It could be open system. Okay, it should be open system. That is what the whole evolutionist and the whole logic argument of the creationists is. That the problem is, without a God, the entire physical system or entire physical universe as a system logically would have to be closed. It cannot be open. You cannot argue it is closed and then we say it came from outside and say it is open. No. If you don't believe in God, it has to be a closed system. Okay? Therefore, the people who argue against the evidence of God should believe and explain then the universe without God. Because they cannot say it's an open system. It is a closed system. So, what is the first law of thermodynamics? Why did we say that? Because the first law of thermodynamics states that in a closed system, the amount of energy which is present in that system is constant. It is not increasing, neither decreasing. That's what we learned. Okay? So it is constant. And also, when it is transformed into other forms of energy, as in case of our air-conditioned compressor and all. So what should happen? It has to have a first cause. So, if the universe contained no mass, no matter, no energy, then the problem is it will be equal to 0. Yes or no? No mass, it just came. So the universe doesn't contain, it came one time. So there was a time that was wrong. Then it should be equal to 0. If it is equal to 0, then the first law would be violated. Why? It cannot decrease. It has to be constant. It has to be constant. And therefore, without exception, according to the law, the force can be who created the matter and the energy is has to be proved according to the whole understanding of thermodynamics. So the first, that it existed always, is not accepted. Two, if it is eternal, existing, then it also is problematic. Because as proved from the first law of thermodynamics, the whole system has to be closed system. Okay? And what happens in a closed system? The energy is constant. Energy is also transforming into less usable forms. This is also irreversible. There is also a finite amount of energy in the universe. And this universe energy is depleting. It is not being used. It is moving into a disorderly form. And this cannot be stopped. If universe, and they say it cannot be stopped. Order to disorder. Now remember, according to the argument, if the universe existed from eternity, without a cause, then you know what would happen? All the energy that we see today cannot exist. Because somewhere down the line, the energy would have been expended, completely gone into life. So therefore, the second law cannot stand, or eternity cannot stand. Therefore, the only thing is, the third important thing, there should be a cause. And that cause is three things. One, he should be self-existent, he should be eternal, and he should be uncaused. And the one that is self-existent, and the one that is eternal, and the one that is uncaused is none other than God. So therefore, the first cause must be something. Okay? What is the first cause then? The first cause should be outside of time and outside of space. Okay? That person should be immaterial. Should be powerful. Should be personal. Okay? And therefore, who is this self-existent, eternal, uncaused cause? That is none other than God of the Bible. And therefore, what is the premises of logic? If you go to your notes, the logic is developed. The logic is this. Everything that has existed has an explanation of its existence. Okay? It has an explanation of its existence. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, as we proved from the thermodynamic principle, the explanation is God. And therefore, what we see today is there is universe exists. And because universe exists, universe has an explanation of its existence. And the explanation of universe existence is none other than God. And this is what cosmological argument is all about. This is what cosmological argument is. Okay, so I have made it clear in your notes. You can please take a time and read it. and you you will understand more. We move down to the second part. What is teleological argument? Now, teleological argument is that since the world is so complex and so ordered, it has to be designed, created by some intelligent being. And according to it, that intelligent being, the designer who designed it, is a designer. Okay? You look at all the Milky Ways, you look at all that is there. I am just giving you some parts here. Detail is in your notes. So it is there. For example, a car points to a manufacturer, a watch points to a watchmaker, iPhone that we use points to its maker. So everything has a maker. Therefore, the universe and everything in it is too complex, orderly, adaptive, apparently purposeful or beautiful to have occurred randomly or accidentally. Impossible. Therefore, it must have been created by an intelligent, wise, or purposeful being. God, according to the Bible, is an intelligent, wise, or purposeful being. Okay? So what is the argument? What design you see today, which is full of order, there is a designer. Because there is a designer, okay, everything is in order. It is so complex. And therefore, it has to be created by an intelligent, wise, or purposeful being. God is that intelligent being. Nothing cannot come out of accidents. Now, I want you to go to page number 34 of your notes. Okay? Of your notes. Now, I want one of you to start reading it so that we understand more what that argument is all about. Page 34, you should start from the third paragraph, which says, here that is a simple formulation. Okay? You have that, or it is different in notes? Okay. It's a different one?
No, it's the same.
34 you have that? Here then is a simple formulation?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Please start reading it from that part onwards. Okay, we will see more of those arguments. Okay, S.S. Sopna, you can go ahead.
Here then is a simple formulation of the teleological argument based on fine-tuning. First one, the fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Second one, it is not due to physical necessity or chance. The third one, therefore, is due to design.
What does it mean? This is called premises. These statements, one after the other statements. Okay, so one statement is built on the other statement. So what is it saying? The fine-tuning, which means the orderness of the creation. That's called the fine-tuning. So the all orderliness of the creation has to have three options. It says it is just a necessity, it just happened. Okay? It's a necessity, which means for surviving, it has to happen. Right? It's a contingency. Two, no reason, it just by chance happened. On three, it has a design, an order. Now, no one will look at this universe, as Romans pointed out, and say that it came all out of physical necessity. God was so bored that he created human. As once one pastor preached. Okay. He said, if you look back, he was saying very in a very sarcastic way. He said, God has, if God would have not created Adam and Eve, there was no work for them. That was his argument. A pastor was serving in the ministry. He said, look at this. If God were not created Adam and Eve, no sin. If no sin, what is the duty of God? Today, God has all the duty because workload is there because he's so sarcastically starting. That's not what it means. Okay? Or it has. Why? Looking at everything in order. And therefore, we are now going to discuss what this design is in particular. Yes, in the Theriological Argument. Go ahead, sister.
In teleology, we come to a new set of facts. Teleos is the Greek word for purpose or design. When we look at nature, we cannot but be amazed at the precise design of nature. You can look at the macro world through a telescope and the greatness and vastness of space. We live in an average-sized planet orbiting an average-sized star called Sun.
Look at it. Look at the masks. This is Hubble telescope view. Now, if you look at this, every light that you see is a galaxy. Every light you are seeing is a galaxy. Now, can you say it is by chance? Anyone looking at it? Why it is moving in its space? Who is controlling this? Two people in a room cannot stay silent. And you are saying this to viewers. It's just going on from vast years in its own orbit. Who designed it? That's the important question that we are going to discuss. Now, why I am making this video is, in my whole last 15 years of teaching apologetics, in all 15 years, I have seen, especially in GBS, I give the notes. I normally should lecture because direct I would lecture at the top. So they go for study for exam. They say, Pastor, we cannot understand your notes, especially apologetics. So I don't want that to happen. So anything right now we're doing it together. It's just to make it very clear what we are dealing with. Okay, go ahead.
We live in an average-sized planet orbiting an average-sized star called Sun, in the suburbs of an ordinary galaxy called the Milky Way. The Milky Way itself consists of millions and billions of stars, so that if you were to count these stars at the rate of 1 a second, it would take 2,500 years. Our universe consists of millions and billions of galaxies, which contain millions and billions of stars each. But that is not all. In this vastness of space, we find that the constants and electrical and physical forces which cause the universe to operate are extremely fine.
But it requires an energy, it requires a power. We call it positive power, we call it kinetic energy, positive energy. We have different types of energies that we talk about. Now, what are these all? It requires a tuning. We will see how it is mentioned from the watch examples and all as we go on.
We do not have a wide range of existence within which for instance, if the rate of expansion of the universe was altered or tampered with in a 55th decimal place, planet Earth would
what is that 55th decimal place? Okay, 0 and 1 and there's on the right side of the other. What is that number called? Infinity. You know that? So the 55th decimal place, planet Earth would not be in existence, which is such a minute distance. The planet would not exist. Who tuned it? Go ahead.
Now there is a dead point followed by 54 zeros, and then you alter the number in the 55th place, an extremely small quantity. The rate of expansion of the universe is fine-tuned to that extent for life to become possible on Earth.
Which is 54th from a decimal to the 54th. We all know minus negative numbers. If it goes on, if it goes to the 55th place, which is only a less alteration, I can't say minute also that. If it's little altered, finish. The whole nature is finished. The whole solar
us to have life on this earth. If they had been slightly altered, our atmosphere would have become too thick or too thin. The earth would have been too hot or too cold or too close to the sun or too far away from the sun for our existence. Even the inorganic chemistry which played a part in all these planets coming into being would not have existed at all. The creation of carbon and oxygen, which are so necessary for organic life, are dependent on these extremely fine-tuned factors to their own basic physical chemistry.
I think that's very clear. You don't need any. Go ahead, don't need that. Okay.
Science has now established beyond a reasonable doubt that there is an important teleos for the purpose of deciding the existence of the universe. In fact, this argument has become so powerful these days that even an astronomer like Mr. Kepler from Britain, who is a scientist, has come to the conclusion that man is at the center of the universe. This is called the anti-Greek principle. Some centuries ago, people thought that the Earth was at the center of the universe and believed in what may be called a geocentric universe. Our generation is being driven to the conclusion, albeit reluctantly, that man is at the center of the universe. One is compelled to conclude that this universe, including mankind, which is intelligent enough to appreciate it, has been made by a designer. When you walk along the seashore and observe the patterns on the sand caused by the waves, you know that it has been caused by nature. If, however, you were to come upon a sand castle made by children playing there sometime earlier, you would not say that the waves caused the sand castle to come into existence. You know that there has been some kind of an intelligence in operation. When you look at the macro universe, therefore, you are forced to the conclusion that there is an intelligence who designed and executed this marvelous piece of work.
So what is this paragraph talking about is the purpose of why the universe is created. Now we are trying to find out that there is a reason for a design. Earlier time they believed that the earth was the center, therefore they used this geocentric principle, which means earth was created for a purpose. Okay? And they had no purpose, but it was a part of the whole system that came into explosion. But now the pantheistic people have also come to a conclusion that no, it has an anthropomorphic principle, which is man is in the center. There's a purpose, is man, human beings. Okay, so the whole understanding has changed. So there is a purpose for this universe to exist. Okay, we move further. Listen, Takacha. Please. Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Listen, Takacha.
Could you please tell the page number?
35.
Okay, from science, the first graph.
No, the last paragraph.
If the macro universe provides convincing proof that we live in a well-designed world, the macro universe that exists in all living beings, including ourselves, adds overwhelming to the evidence of the Delios. According to the
Delios means here it is purpose. Okay? It is pointing to a purpose of this universe. Okay.
Yep. According to the then a medical doctor turned molecular biologist and a self-confessed agnostic in his book Evolution, a theory in crisis, while explaining the cell of any living being, states that it is extremely complex. To grasp the reality of life as it has been revealed by molecular biology, we must magnify a cell 1,000 million times until it is 20 kilometers in diameter and it resembles a giant ship, large enough to cover a great city. Would see what we would then see would be an object of unparalleled complexity and adaptive design. On the surface of the cell, we would see millions of openings like the portholes of a vast spaceship, opening and closing to allow a stream of material to flow in and out. If we were to enter one of these openings, we would find ourselves in a world of supreme technology and bewildering complexity.
Now, what I would trying to say, each of the cells in our body, now if you're going to magnify it, okay, if you're going to magnify it 1,000 million times, and if that reaches a radius of 20 kilometers, inside that is the vast storage of library. One cell. Now, what is the content in that one cell? I'm not talking about any others. One part in a cell. Now, let's see what is.
Business Richard Dawkins testifies that
He said he's the guy who said about delusion of thought. Now he's saying about this that. Okay, go ahead.
each nucleus contains a digitally coded database of larger information content than all 30 volumes of Encyclopedia Britannica put
Volumes of Encyclopedia Britannica. I hope you go online and Encyclopedia Britannica. And what you find there is equivalent to 30 volumes. 30 volumes of Encyclopedia Britannica in one cell. And what we contain is 10 trillion. And we are so, recently there was a case solved in Britain where a guy who killed a couple 20. They caught him through the DNA test. The last moment. Why? They went and magnified his eyes through some process, scientific process. You know what? The last moment when he stabbed that couple, the alarm or the voice and all that last stage the couples rooted about was captured in his eyes. And they brought the print out. What does our body contain? We can't think.
to the micro nature, we find a tremendous mass of information packed into the small space of a gene or a cell. This neglects serious consideration in favor of an intelligence behind the universe. We see both from the macro universe and the micro universe that we are truly designed by a wise and intelligent creator.
So we are, thank you. The rest you can read it. I hope you understood what we are trying to conclude. So there is a designer behind all that we find, and therefore the teleological argument is that this designer is none other than God Almighty. Okay? So now I will give you a little more further. So what does it mean? And I'll give you a break. Okay? Then we go to the moral argument. Okay, now what we read now, I'll make it in a slide so that you will also understand. Teleological is, we said, it's a Greek word which means telos, meaning design or purpose. Okay? We said the cosmological argument, what we learned is the fact that the universe exists. We learn all things that exist must have a cause. So what is the first cause? Cause of everything is God. We made it very clear from the thermodynamic principles. Whereas, what is the teleological argument just now read by Supra and Lesser? is based on the character of the world and the universe. It is based on the character of the world and the universe, the design. So what is the argument all about? There is so much extraordinary interlocking, meaning it is so complexity, it is so ordered, that there should be a designer who is intelligent behind what you see today in this world. So what is the premises we try to define? This is the premises. The complexity of life on earth and the harmonious organization of, that was what was read now, of living organism exhibits evidence of intelligent design. Okay? A design necessitates the presence of a designer. And who is that? That designer is God. Okay? But now, there are different people who try to explain this in a different way. First person was William Palin. Okay? How did he design? He said in his book Natural Theology, he argued that the efficiency and the complexity of what you see with your naked eyes, okay, it should be well designed. For example, look at your own eyes, look at your own brain, all organs of your body. It is so perfect and it has a purpose. Like it is not in the head is not in the leg. It has all its purpose. Okay? Now in his book he talks about the whole detail. You would be so wondering about how he explained about skin and the body. So he says there is a purpose behind everything. So he gives an example. Now what is the example? He uses watch and its maker. And he gives a new analogy. He says by looking at your watch and all the complex how it is working in unison, how it is working together, we cannot say that it just existed. We cannot say that. But you will say it is designed. Okay? And what is that design? A watchmaker. So looking at all that complexity of cells, brain, and all eyes and everything in a part, what does it mean? That there is a divine watchmaker, according to Palin, and that watchmaker is God. Then he goes on to give an example. Okay, before I go on to this argument, he goes on to give an example. He says you are walking in a beach. You come across and you stumble against a stone. You know what we'll do? Oh, stone! You will take the stone and throw it into the water. You will not care. But you go and suddenly again you stumble and you find the Rolex watch. He asked this question, how many fools are there who will throw it into the water? But rather appreciate and say, no, it came by chance. Let's throw it, man. Another chance will be there in the front. No, it's going to be an opportunity. You know, it is designed where? What value it has. So if you come across one which was a stone, you just threw it. But because you know, other stone is also found. But here it is not stone, but you went again, you found a watch. You know what is the cost behind it. You appreciated it. That's his argument. But against Palin's argument, there are people like David Hume, you know about him in the Enlightenment time. He said that the whole argument that Palin is using about watch is very weak. Why? Because he says that the object that is natural, which is example of eye, brain, everything, and something that was designed by human being doesn't compare together. You cannot compare it together. Okay? The similar analogy is not strong. So he said that the cause of the order in example cannot be similar to that of the watch. Watch has to be designed. And therefore he said, no, it has instinct within, the instinct. You know the Darwin theory, right? About the bird went and studied. Actually, Darwin wanted to become a priest. We know that. How he diverted and went all the way into the Amazons and all those places to study about the extinct birds and finally understood the survival of the birds. That's how his theory of whole evolution came up. The instinct within. So it's all that within concept that everything is arranged. But the problem is, the question is, if the world universe was designed, who designed it? Still the question stays. And therefore, the conclusion remains there should be a designer outside the cosmos. Okay? Another person was Darwin. I already talked about it. He talks about adaptation theory, the instinct within. That's why the survival happens. Okay? So, you know, what is our argument? Our argument is, okay, fine. Evolution, you believe that it is happening within. But who caused that instinct to happen? We believe it is God. So to survive, God has created that instinct within. And therefore, it is very clear from biblical argument that it is created by God. So that's mainly the whole of argument that we are talking about. Okay? I will not go into much detail. There are much details we have to cover. You understood what it is. I hope so. So we will stop here and have a 10 minutes break and then we will come back and we'll further continue. That is very important. Now, when we talk about the moral argument, the basic premises is, let me say that we will read together. This is what the basic premises of the moral argument will look like. Okay? This is the premises. The moral argument is that every one of us have a conscience. All of us. No matter person is atheist or what worldview he or she believes, has a conscience. What is conscience? This is right, that is wrong. Okay? You can't just say, call it as an instinct. It has to have a higher conscience or higher moral absolute. There should be somewhere this moral values or duties are derived. Okay, values and duties are two different things. Okay, as we read together, we will learn more about it. But just keep this. This is a logic argument of what moral argument is. Okay, so you cannot just have right and wrong. Now, one of the professors who was teaching and questioning the moral argument, he said, there is no moral argument. How can you say moral argument? It's all based on freedom of human being, instinct. The instinct. Okay. So he thought and went. So some of the students were so influenced in the class. It is always there. So other teacher who dropped into the class was a person who was God-fearing. So he started his course. Suddenly this boy who was so influenced by the atheistic worldview of self-understanding of a moral value, which is there is no value at all. It all depends upon you. He got up in the class and asked a question. He said, sir, is there any moral values? There is no moral values. What we determine is our value. So he tried to question as though he is more wiser than this God-fearing professor. Anyhow, that day there was a test. It was 30% test, class test. So the professor gave the question. The class is finished. And then and there only, before the class ended, the mark was given by the professor. Everyone in the class passed except the guy who asked the question. He failed, but he was an intelligent guy. He got up in the class and argued with the professor. He said, this is not right what you did. This is not right what you did. I wrote the correct answer. I wrote it right and you made it wrong. This is not right. This is not justice. So the professor said, that's my value. And I feel you should get a 0. He said, that's not fair. He said, where did you get the word fair from? How did you get the word fair from? He said, that's not right. That's not justice. He said, where did you get all these values from? Finally, he had to say, it is not fair because what you thought I wrote. So he said, okay. That means you are saying that this is not fair because based on a higher value, which is my notes. That's what I thought. So just because I gave you a 0, you got so annoyed. And you are counting on your argument, you're basing your argument on a higher value, which is my lecture, my notes, and questioning me that it is not fair. In the beginning of the class, what did you say? There is no moral values. If we go according to that, this world will not exist. My value is to give you 0, and you are not accepting it. Can it happen? Absolutely no. Okay? So therefore, any moral value which is good or bad, any duty which is obligatory in nature and right and wrong, that's a distinction, has to on something higher, which we call it as absolute morality, moral absolute. If that is the basis, if God does not exist, then we should say absolutely there is no moral value. Value doesn't exist. But the fact is, in the universe, value exists. Value exists. And therefore, God exists. It's very simple argument. You got the point? This is what moral argument is. Now we will read a little more further, so that we bring in some Platonic ideas. Will not go detail, but there is a Platonic concept called the euphoria type dilemma, which Plato used to explain to the moral argument, which we need to understand as we are doing the apologetic course. Okay? So we will read together and see how things are. Pastor Joseph, you can read the page number 31 from the beginning, where it says moral argument based upon moral values and duties. Pastor Joseph, Sixton, Katubi, M. Dave, Sharjah. Welcome, Pastor. God bless you.
Moral argument based upon moral values and duties. A number of ethicists such as Robert Adams, William Alston, Mark Linville, Paul Copan, John Hare, Stephen Evans, and others have defended various moral arguments for God. In order to understand the virtue of the moral argument, it's necessary that we grasp a couple of important distinctions. First, we should distinguish between moral values and duties. Values have to do with whether something is good or bad. Duties have to do with whether something is right or wrong. Good, bad has to do with something's worth, which, while right, wrong has to do with something's being obligatory.
If that distinction very clear. Okay, when we are making our argument, there's a very vast distinction, even though we commonly use simultaneously both the terms. Okay, but there's a distinction here. Okay, okay, thank you. Sharon, go ahead with the next paragraph.
Yes. Second, there is that distinction between being objective or subjective. Objective or subjective. By objective, I means independent of people's opinions. By subjective, I means independent on people's opinions. So to say that there are objective moral values is to say that something is good or bad independent of whatever people think about it. Similarly,
just a very important thing. So what is our argument here? The moral argument of moral duties. We are here arguing objective moral values. Okay, very important. Objective moral values. Meaning whether people like it or dislike it. These are values. Okay, so we are talking of objective moral values. Okay, go ahead.
Similarly, to say that we have objective moral duties is to say the certain the moral argument for God's existence follows this line of thinking. Objective moral laws exist and they must have come from an objective moral lawgiver. There are two parts of this argument. The first have to do with conception, the very idea that we as humans can universally conceive of goodness and agree on what is ultimately good. Means being must embody this ultimate goodness. The second part of the moral argument has to do with obligation. All people moral obligation to do good and avoid evil. So being must have put it there.
Okay, now thank you, brother. Thank you. So here, two things we are trying to distinct from the definitions. The first one is the whole concept of conception. That means we say he's a good person, she's a good lady. What basis? You got it? It's a conception. That means we have categorized. This behavior comes under this particular value, and therefore that's the worth of that person. That's how we see the world. The moment we say, no, this is bad, we will be far away from that person. Because we define the worth of that individual in such a way. Especially Proverbs gives advice to how to develop that worthlessness. That's what book of Proverbs is all about. Okay? In the same way, there are duties that is given to us. Now, as we are staying here in this land, there are certain duties that we have to do every day of our life. In relation to our family, in relation to the church, in relation to the society, in relation to our neighbors, in relation to the workplace that we are. And this also is obligatory in nature, and it is good and bad. You got it? It is good and bad. So where is this good and bad coming from? Therefore we say it has to exist. There should be some moral, absolute moralness should be there. And what is an absolute moral? That's what now we are defining the premises. We are going to next is define the statement. Right, Abraham? Go ahead, reading.
These moral arguments go something like this. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists.
That's the very premises that we are developing. Okay, in other words, go ahead.
In other words, it is possible to conceive of an object everyone at all times. An objective moral law can exist only if there is an objective moral lawgiver. Therefore, because we can conceive of an objective moral law, an objective moral lawgiver must exist.
Now, what we are saying is, some people say, no, these are some of the traits, instincts. Now, let's see. If you see universally, stealing is prohibited. There is a common universal moral behavior. How did that come from? And if you trace back, it will reach all the law today is Rex, which is the Romans. Tracing back the Roman, you go to the Caesarian. Tracing back the Caesarian contemporary is Mosaic law. You got it? If you go further down the line, then comes the whole notion of Paul's argument of conscience. If you again develop down the line of conscience, it is based on that God said, judge not. Because you can be a judge, but you can never be a righteous judge. If you want to judge the conscience, you cannot be a judge who can give a right judgment until the one who judged is righteous. And therefore, God being righteous understands the conscience. An absolute moral lawgiver. Now, that's the basis that we deal with moral argument. Is it clear? Now we go on to one of the Platonic story or the whole play, which normally is used and is next paragraph. We are going to read it. Detail, you can go online and read about all those in detail about the play and all those. But we are just basic. How can we define? Sony Thomas, go ahead and read the next paragraph, please. No. It's not that. Page 32. He read that premise. Just the Euthyphora dilemma.
The Euthyphora
Dilemma. Yes.
The objection raised by ethicists in response to moral argument is that of he Euthyphora dilemma, named after a character in one of Plato's dialogues.
It's not he, it's the. One T is this character. T.
Okay. It basically goes like this: is something good because God's will it, God wills it, or does God will something because it is good? If you say that something is good,
Did you get the point? The argument is there. Why do you call something as good? Why do you call something as good? Do you call something good because God said, God wills it? It's because God wanted that. Or the second argument is it something good because what you call good is good? Okay? Because what you call good is good. So there are two types of arguments. Now we are going to develop a little more further. Go ahead.
if you say that something is good because God wills it, then what is good becomes arbitrary.
You got the point? It is compulsion. It is compulsion. If you say this is good, then it is God wills. I don't like it. It's arbitrary being forced on me. Okay? Next one.
God could have willed that hatred is good, and then we would have been morally obligated to hate one another.
See the argument of atheists. They say, if God willed and said, okay, hate one another. Hate one another. What would have happened? That would have, we should have hated him. Because God willed it. See, that's a logic argument. Go ahead, Sony. Sony, I know. Your children's are playing. Don't worry. Okay, don't worry about it. It all happens. I also have kids around me. So you can go ahead.
Some moral values at least seem to be necessary. But if you say that God wills something because it is good, then what is good or bad is independent of God. In that case, moral values and duties exist independently of God, which contradicts premise one.
Okay, you got the point? If you say it is good because it is good, it's good. And therefore, the whole premises of our moral argument are question.
The weakness of the Euthyphora dilemma is that the dilemma it presents is a false one because there is a third alternative, namely, God wills something because He is good.
That is the third, that part they have not seen. Why does God wills something is good? God wills something is good because God is good. Why does God say it is good? Because God is good. Go ahead.
God's own nature is the standard of goodness, and His commandments to us are expressions of His nature.
Okay.
In short, our moral duties are determined by the commands of a just and loving God. So moral values are not independent of God because God's own character defines what is good. God is essentially...
That is the most important thing. Keep that in mind. When Bible says God is good, it is that part that God is good defines the whole goodness of what it is. Is that clear? Okay? So this is very important. Okay, go ahead.
God is essentially compassionate, fair, kind, impartial, and so on. His nature is the moral standard determining good and bad. His commands necessarily reflect in turn his moral nature. Therefore, they are not arbitrary. The morally good/bad is determined by God's nature, and the morally right/wrong is determined by His will. God wills something because He is good, and something is right because God wills it.
How many of you understood that? Okay, see the second last line. The values are determined by God's nature. The duties are determined by His will, because duties that He said for us to do is not for our burdensome, but rather it is out of His goodness that God determines what is good and what is bad. Thank you, Sonny. Thank you. Mr. Jenny, you can read the next part.
Is moral behavior instinct. Very often, atheists explain away morality as purely instinctive behavior, but can this explanation hold water? Let us examine it briefly. What is an instinct? Animals move by instincts. Whatever they feel like, they do. We human beings have a different dimension. Let me give you an illustration. If I hear a person crying out for help from a distance, I would find two voices operating
within me.
Okay, I would find two voices operating within me. One voice would suggest that I run away so that I'm also not overtaken by danger. Now that can be called the instinct of self-preservation, by which the whole animal kingdom continues to exist and preserve its various species. As a human being, I do not hesitate to admit that I share this instinct with animals, but I also admit to hearing another voice within me which says that I must go and help this person in trouble. Now, I'm not sure whether I would call that an instinct, because that is a desire to do the unlikely. One could even explain it away, comparing it to a mother's instinct to save the life of her child by sacrificing her own life. But that is not all. I hear a third voice within me which seems to instruct me as to which instinct I should suppress and which one I should strengthen. Now, what is the third voice? Can a voice which arbitrates between two instincts be also an instinct itself, or would it belong to another and higher category?
You got the question? Okay. Now, when you hear a voice at a distance, you feel which is right, which is wrong, what you should take. One instinct would say, take your precaution. The other instinct would say, let's see, and if there is a person in need, we will help it. Now, these two voices, now you have to make a choice between these two. Can it be merely an instinct to help you take the choice? But there is something beyond the instinct there, which is the conscience. And in your conscience is where the deep down the values are all about. Of health, of kindness, of mercy. And who gives that? It is the third voice, which is from a higher authority, which is God Himself. So this is what an moral argument is all about. Okay? So before we conclude, I give you one more quote from C.S. Lewis, because he has written a lot vast on this. One quote and finish this one. C.S. Lewis, he says that when someone quarrels, they are not just saying that something the other person did displeases only them. Okay, when there is a quarrel happening between it, doesn't show that they're displeased with each other. They are appealing to some standard. Actually, what is the other doing? They are quarreling because there is a standard. There is a standard of the behavior where one says that the other person is wrong. And then the question comes, where does this standard come from? Where does this fairness come from? You just imagine if you say, this whole fairness comes from my instinct. Can the society survive? Okay? Can the society survive? Never. The society cannot survive at all. Can the society survive? No. What is our instinct to do right or wrong? Whenever there is no camera, we go about 160. The space it is reached, we come back to 120. Yes or no? That is our instinct. That's what our normal instinct is. Right? And that day would be, I won't say bad luck or good luck or anything. Somehow, everything is going against, and suddenly there is a mobile camera somewhere, you got a 600 or 800. Then we say, God, why did you do that? Again, going back to God, what to do. So that's the instinct that we all have. So that's the argument. So what we did is we try to see the cosmological, the teleological, and the moral argument. Next one is very simple, but which is the ontological argument. Now, what is the ontological argument? It's there in that three premises given there. Now, Islam, which you may study, especially if it is a Roman Catholic seminary, they teach a lot on his philosophies. So he is the one who talks about the whole concept of, and in your theology also, when you study about God, you study about the ontological aspect of God, the ontology, the ontos. You would have studied in theology. The whole ontos means the being of God, the very being of God. So based on the being of God, there is a understanding of the existence of God. Okay? So we go to the Ramesh, you can read next one.
Okay. The ontological argument for the existence of God was proposed by Anselm. The root of the word ontos, meaning being. Basically, the argument goes like this. Number one, God is the greatest being anyone can think about. If we could think of a being greater than God, then that being would be God. Therefore, nothing greater than God can be conceived. Point number two, it is greater to really exist than to merely exist as an idea. In other words, you could think about a being like God, but your thoughts about God are not as great as God. For example, an artist could have an idea for a painting, or he could actually paint something which is greater. Point number three, God is the greatest conceivable being, so he must exist not just as an idea, but also in reality. Therefore, God exists.
And this is based on the being of God. Okay. One correction: when you read, you should never say point in argument. It should be premises. Okay, premises number one. It's a statement. It's a series of statements. Never it is a point. Number one has to do with other things. But it's premises number one. Okay. Now, what does the argument say? It says, if you want to think something great in a way, what comes to our mind, majority of the people's mind, is God. There's nothing beyond God that is conceivable, that we can think. He's the greatest. Now, if you can think something beyond God, then what you thought becomes God. But the problem is, there's a problem. What you thought about God is just an idea. It's just an idea. So if an artist has an idea of what he's about to paint, is the idea greater than the artist? Is the question. So the question is, who is the greatest? So therefore, ideas can be created a lot beyond anyone, but that doesn't mean the idea is greatest, but rather anything that you can conceive, which is conceivable, is God alone, and therefore, in reality, God in his being is the greatest, and therefore God exists. That's what you can conceive. Okay? Now we covered upon the existence of God before we move on further with the whole problem, which is called the problem of evil, which is one of the most important understanding in the scripture, which is being questioned from a long time ago, and we will deal with that. Is there any questions before we move on? Of what we did?
Yes, sir. This is Arthur, sir. I have a question, sir. Can we prove the existence of God through the sustainability theory?
Okay. Because there are three versions of sustainability. Which one are you talking about?
Anyone you can talk about.
Now, what is in your mind? You can just explain.
someone is sustaining this universe. Someone is sustaining the world. Without sustaining it, as you said, it's order to disorder.
Yes.
So something is sustaining it.
Yes. That's how we started with the argument, where it says there's a very important. Now, just to make you understand, I don't know how many of you will understand that. You please go back to your what you are arguing and make it a little more logical in sense. Please go to page number 28, and read paragraph 2. Brother Atif, you can read yourself. Paragraph 2. However,
Contingency means
yes,
dependency.
that's what you're saying. All dependent on something. You got it?
Got it.
It's a thing. Okay, go ahead.
Everything in the universe is about contingent things that may surprise you. Something that is contingent is not necessary.
No,
Yeah.
Let's break it down.
Okay.
What did you understand? You're just representing the whole class. We're just trying to discuss. What did you understand by the statement? Something that is contingent is not necessary. Something that is dependent on something is not necessary. Beginning of class, right?
Yes.
Read the next line. In other words,
the chair does not have to exist.
doesn't have to exist. Neither does, if you go back, neither does the tree.
Yep, beginning, correct.
Neither we who are sitting in the class. Because everything that exists is dependable. So anything that is dependable, therefore,
However, there is a problem with the theory of contingent, as it can have an endless series of contingent.
something that cause. Okay, and what is that cause? You can't say, as example, chair. Then you go on existing that no and different words such a okay and cause. Because he is uncaused to cause, that's why we argue the thermodynamics. Uncaused, he is the one in the closed system, energy, matter, and all those things.